The Chopin was overriding me a little bit there. And come here and see how this thing's going. If I can keep my mind on that red dot up there instead of that picture there, I think I'll do better. Well, anyway, David suggested I write a book. And I said, it's too much trouble. Everybody's writing a book. And he said, well, you ought to record some of the crazy things that's happened to you. And I said, he said, why don't you make a tape? Well, I got thinking about this, and then Vic and Tom suggested it. Bob said he would like it. So I'm going to try to do this. Now, in these experiences that I'm going to go through, I'm going to use names that existed. I'm not going to use fictitious names because I don't think it matters a lot. A lot of the people I'm going to be mentioning are gone anyway. But they did happen. And so there's no use of me sitting here and acting like they didn't and try to make it sound like a third-person thing. So I'm going to sound like the hero all through this thing, and I'm sorry about that. But there's one thing about it. I've got some of these things I've mentioned and the different ones, and even not just a few days ago, I talked to Vernon Stanley up in Grove Seal, Detroit, rather, and he said the same thing. So I'm going to do this. Anyway, I want to go back to a thing that I always got a kick out of to start with. Dad bought the drugstore, Madison Willard Street in Muncie. I think it was 1919. At that point, I was 11 years old. I worked in the store, and when I came home from school, I didn't go out and play baseball or anything like that. I went behind the soda fountain. And, but I liked it. I liked selling, and I still like selling. But you know, Dad used to tell me a lot of stories, and I'm not going to get into those because if I tell Dad's stories, I won't get much of my own told. But one thing that I got a kick out of, Dad bought the store from Mrs. Benedum, who was a widow of Clyde Benedum, who owned the store at that time. And he became a victim of a gunshot one night when some guy held up the store and shot him. But that's another story. I'm not going to go into details of that. But then Dad bought the store later. But before Dad bought the store, Clyde's cousin or something, Charlie Benedum, ran the store. And one side of the store was I think kind of a saloon or something. And the other side tried to be a drugstore. Well, anyway, Charlie was sitting there one day, and a man came in who was an advanced man agent for a circus. Well, this was around the turn of the century, I guess. Back then, it was quite a thing for a circus to come to town, and quite often it was they depended on as much free stuff as they get. So the advanced man said to Charlie, he said, we've got a circus coming to town. We're just wondering if you'd care if we set up on that land there at 5th and Madison Street. Quite a vacant lot there at the time. And Charlie says, no, it's all right with me. Well, time went on, the circus got to town unloaded, and then came a guy to see Charlie and just raising the devil. He said, what's the idea of telling people they could put a circus up on my land? Charlie says, I didn't tell them to do it, so they came in and asked me if I cared, and it wasn't my land. I didn't care, so the circus is there. Anyway, it just sort of sets the atmosphere for things in that area. And I started in business, I think I opened June the 6th. Oh, that's not very far from now. June the 6th, 1936. And I was in the second floor of the Weiser the Weiser building, rather, which is at Walnut and Main Street in Muncie, across from the courthouse. And so I started with a photostat machine. With a photostat machine, you have to explain that today. A photostat camera, I should call it. I don't know why we always call it a machine. It was a camera that held a roll of paper 18 inches wide and 250 feet long. Sold for cost me about 18 bucks. Anyway, the camera then had a long lens. I think it was right around a 20-inch focal length lens, and on the front of the lens was a prism so that it could shoot down at 90 degrees. There was a board there which would go up and down, and you'd lay a copy on there and expose it like you would with any camera. And then this roll of paper, you would roll with a crank on the side of this camera body. You crank this sheet of paper down into a developing tank, which was about 18 by 22 or 24 maybe. And that tank had a developer in it. Well, the print would go in there and develop. You'd leave it in there for a minute or so, and then you'd turn another crank and roll that paper out of there into the fixing tray, which was right behind it. Then it'd be in the fixture for a short time. Then that print had to be taken out, washed in water thoroughly, and then squeegeed off and put through a hot dryer or worm dryer, whatever. And so this would be a print, but it would be, in case of a letter, an ordinary letter would come out on that first print as white lines or white letters on a black background, which basically was a paper negative. Correct reading, because the prism corrected it. Then you'd put that negative back on the copy table if they wanted a positive, and rephotograph that, and you'd get a positive print. It was the only way back then a document could be photographed and still be legal in a court. And so the anyway, then I built a blueprint machine. That's another story. I don't want to get into that too much. But it was built. I had run the blueprints at Warner Gear, and I knew what had to happen. So I designed this thing and fixed it so the mercury vapor lights on the photostat camera could be rolled over and made the exposure of the blueprint while it went under this thing. Well, anyway, so I made blueprints, photostats. Then one day, Charlie Price, an old friend, called me and says, "Roger, aren't you in the photographic business?" And I said, "Well, I guess so, Charlie. I got a heck of a big camera up here." I said, "Why?" And he said, "Well, I want to buy a camera, and there's nobody that sells them in Muncie." He said, "Why don't you order one for me?" I said, "Well, give me the dope." He says, "It's called an Argus." So it sells for $12. It's got a 4.5 lens, 4.5 lens. And and he says it's made in Ann Arbor, Michigan by the International Research Corporation. Gave me the address and everything, so I ordered one. In a few days, I got a letter back. Said I had to buy 3 to get a franchise. I called Charlie. I said, "My golly, Charlie, those things cost me $8 a piece, and they want me to buy 3 of them. That'd be $24. I said, "I don't know what I'd do with the other 2. He says, "Well, forget it." And so I did. For about an hour or so, Charlie called me back, said, "Order all 3 of those. I've sold the other 2 for you." That got me into the camera business, and it was 35 millimeters, so I've been interested in 35 ever since. There's been some people have noticed I sell a camera, and that's something I don't even have on land here. I'm going to show it to you. It's called a Leica. You probably heard of it. Anyway, that got me into the business. Now, on the following Memorial weekend, Warner Watson helped me. We moved my store from the second floor of the Weiser building to the first floor of the Canopic Apartments, which had business rooms along Jackson Street across from the police station. So we hauled the stuff down there. I had practically nothing to put in the showroom, but I put my photostat camera, and I did get a blueprint printer at least. I went in the back room. I had about a 6-foot showcase in the storeroom, which was about 20 feet wide and 30 feet long. That I don't mean the showcase, the room was. And this 6-foot case, I had a little bit of stock in there, and over in the corner was a little fenced-in area, which was my office, and the rest of the room was just empty. Well, anyway, I started making a little money, and I put it back into the business, and in a year or so, I began to have what looked like a store. And it kept advancing. I kept working all hours of the day and most of the night. And got a store. It was a respectable-looking place. It wasn't fancy by today's standards by any means. But in 1936, you didn't have to put a big show on. You just opened up, offered service, and tried to make quality and that sort of thing as part of your job. And it wasn't too bad at times. People were different then, the situations were different, and I don't think as quite as much greed went on then as it is today. People just trying to make a living. Anyway, it got so that I had some showcases and cash register and the normal things the store would have. And I began to get known in the store. But one of the early things that happened to me was a man walked in one day, had an invoice. He wanted to show this invoice to somebody, or give somebody a copy of it, I guess, to prove the delivery of something. So he just wanted a negative made, because that's all he needed. So I made the photostat negative for him, and then I took it out and wrote up I started to write up an invoice for him. It was only 50 cents. And he said, well, charge that to the Anchor Hocking Glass Company of Lancaster, Ohio, and send in the bill. And this is 50 cents, see. Well, so I did that. Now, it wasn't long after that day, I don't know, 3 or 4 days, kind of busy in the store, and a messenger boy. Now, messenger boys back then, they wore a kind of a khaki uniform with a sort of a military type cap and a kind of a military jacket. Yeah, it wasn't really military, but it was on that order. And they rode a bicycle. He come in and handed me this telegram here in an envelope and said, it's collect. You owe me 57 cents. So I took 57 cents out of my pocket or the register or something, handed it to him, and took the envelope and just shoved it in my pocket because I was busy and didn't want to take the time to read it then. So things died down later in the afternoon, and so I happened to think of that. I pulled it out of my pocket and opened it up, and here is a telegram. Now I'm going to show you that it is a Western Union telegram, a genuine telegram. Now what it says here, says in reorder number so-and-so, shipment received at Winchester, October the 18th, 1940. Says, please mail invoice today. Refer to request of November 1st. Always mail invoices on the date of shipment. Anchor Hocking Glass Corporation, Gautier or something, purchasing department. Now, this really gave me a thrill. And I did a job worth 50 cents. And then they sent me a telegram, collect for 57 cents to tell me how to bill them correctly. It was an education I wasn't really expecting or wanted. But anyway, wasn't long after that, I got a thing in the mail I want to show you this stuff to prove to you that I'm not kidding. Remember, this was November the 18th, 1940. Here's a letter from Anchor Hocking, the envelope, and there's the stamp. You can see what it was at 3 cents. Remember that? Anyway, and I got in the mail. Oh, I forgot to mention something. Yeah, I better bring this up to date. What I did when I got that telegram, I got a little peeved. So I wrote a new invoice out and put down one collect telegram, 57 cents, photostat job, 50 cents, total $1.07. And then I mailed it to them as requested in their telegram. And then on November the 25th, I got this thing from Anchor Hocking. It's a letter. It says Pelham Photocopy Service, which was my name, man. And it's from the Accounts Payable Department. It says, we are debiting your account in the amount of 57 cents for one collect telegram on November the 19th. And says, as per the instructions of Mr. D.A. Thompson, in accordance with his letter of November the 23rd. Now, I don't have that letter of 23rd here anymore, but I do have this, and here is the check here for 49 cents. They even took a 2% discount from the 50 cents. And it's an early business experience I had that wasn't exactly something I had wanted to get this education in a hurry or anything like that. But I got it. Well, anyway, I decided there wasn't much I could do about it, except one thing. Having worked at Warner Gear, I knew how important paperwork was. Paper just has to be one of the most important things in any business anymore. The government, on down to little stores. They got to have a lot of paperwork. Well, anyway, I decided one way I won't get a penny out of it, but I'll certainly cost Anchor Hocking some money. I didn't cash the check. As you see, I still have it, and this is 1996. 56 years. So I got a letter here on February the 5th, 1941, from Anchor Hocking. Nice bond paper, too. It says, gentlemen, if you have not already done so, kindly deposit our check dated November the 27th, 1940, in the amount of 49 cents. This check has not yet been returned to our bank, and we are anxious to clear the matter from our records. Now, even back then, it was signed, very truly yours, Anchor Hocking Glass Corporation, Cyrus L. Fulton. I don't know whether Mr. Fulton's alive or not, but it ain't worth it. And he was assistant treasurer of Anchor Hocking. Now, that's early in my life, I was getting letters and correspondence from important people. A beautiful autograph. Someday I ought to put this in my autograph collection because it should be one of my choice autographs. Look how nice he scribbled that on there, see? Very colorful. Anyway, I got the letter. I didn't answer the letter. So 2 or 3 weeks went by. I don't remember the date of that. 2 or 3 weeks went by, and lo and behold, I got a long-distance call from this Mr. Thompson, or whatever his name is. Fulton, Mr. Fulton. Wanting to know why I hadn't cashed the check. I says, Mr. Fulton, it's very simple. You owe me 58 cents now. You took a 2% discount, which I didn't authorize, and so you still owe me for that collect telegram. And I said, I'm not going to cash the check until I get enough letters from you with postage on it to equal 58 cents. Then I'll figure the bill is paid. In the meantime, you can call me, write letters, do whatever you want. I couldn't care less. Well, that was the end of the thing. I haven't heard from Anchor Hocking in all these 56 years. I almost thought of copying this stuff and send it to the president of Anchor Hocking today and find out what, maybe he can figure out how much the interest would be on 57 cents in all these years. Well, that's all right. Now, I want to get to some other things here. I made a few notes which I want to refer to get this thing going. And let's see, oh yeah. Oh, now another thing happened early when I first got into this camera business. I met a guy named Harold Crosby or Crosby. I can never think which it is. He was the assistant manager of a Kresge 10-cent store. That's back when they had men doing those jobs instead of kids. And so he was interested in photography and knew quite a bit about it. He gave me a lot of advice, a lot of helpful advice. Real nice fellow. So one day he had me order something for him. And I ordered it. When it came in, called him, he came up and he said, well, what owe you? And I says, Harold, $8. He said, wait a minute. $8 is your cost on it. I said, yes, Harold, but you've done so much for me, I'll give it to you at cost. He said, you got to learn something and you got to learn it now. He said, the price of that is $12. And he says, you got to learn that you have to make a profit when you sell something to your friends, because your enemies won't trade with you. So he said, that's something that you need to know and don't forget. Well, I've kept that in my mind, and quite often the situation has come up. And another thing I've been lacking in some of my education in some respects. For instance, no one ever explained to me why you're supposed to give a discount to a millionaire and charge Joe Blow the full price. At my age of 87, I still don't understand why that seems to be an accepted rule by a lot of people. But I've never accepted it, and I still have friends. And Harold was right. I sure haven't sold too much to my enemies. But anyway, I just want to bring that up because it leads into another story of that I have mentioned several times to individuals. And that is Fred Rose was president of the, I believe it was the Delaware Trust Company or some Delaware Bank or something there in Muncie. And he was a banker like they write movies about. Very stern, very demanding. Basically a nice guy. And he had 3 sons. And I didn't call him Fred then, I called him Mr. Rose. I guess I should do so at this point. So Mr. Rose would come in the store and talk about cameras every once in a while, every few days, as a matter of fact. And then he come in one day and he says, Roger, I'd like to have an Exacta. He says, I know you're against it, but he says, I think I'd like to have one. Well, I didn't want to order one and put it in stock in hopes of selling it to him, but another man insisted I get him an Exacta, so I got one in. And I called Mr. Rose and told him I had it. If he would like to pick it up and take it home and look at it that night and get it back to me in the morning, that'd be fine. So he did that. When he walked in the next morning, he says, no, you're right. I want a Leica. I don't want this thing, so I'll talk to you later. Well, time went on. One day he called me and wanted to know if I could come over to the bank and talk to him. And I said, certainly. So I walked over to the bank, which is about 2 blocks away, and when I got there, now he had a private office at the front of the bank and on the west side, which was closed in, no windows, a private office, in other words, where he could talk over big deals. But he wasn't in that private office when I got over there. He was sitting out adjacent to the private office in a fenced-in area where there were several desks. He was sitting at the middle one, and he got up, shook hands, greeted me, and told me to have a chair. I sat down beside the desk, and I suddenly realized something. The reason he wasn't in that private office, it was a very good idea for me to sit there where people coming in the bank would see Roger Pelham talking to Fred Rose. I thought it was a very clever idea. Anyway, Mr. Rose started in on this thing. He says, you know, I was thinking about this Leica, and he says, you told me what the cost would be on that Leica, the Leicas you have over there with the F2 lens and the ever-ready case. And he says, I'll be willing to, I'll pay you what you've told me, which was list price. He had a list of a bunch of lenses and accessories that he wanted and that he was talking about. And so I looked at the list and I just left it laying on the desk because he was talking. He's my son, Steve, or Stu, I guess it was, who you know, has a friend in Toledo that has a drugstore there, and they have a camera department. Says he tells me that you get 40% off on this Leica stuff. And so he says, I think that in view of that, I'll have you order this stuff. But he says, I don't know for sure at the moment. He says, I'll be able to pick up this Leica this afternoon. But he says, the way things look in Europe right now, he says, I think that I better get this stuff on order so that I'll be sure and get it, because he said it may be that I won't be able to get it if the war gets any worse over there. So, of course, you know, the war was just in Europe for a while. So he says, now, here's the thing. He says, all you have to do is take this list of things that I do, write up an order, and send it to Leica, and they'll ship you the stuff. And he says, that's all you have to do is write the order, and says, you can very well sell me that stuff at 25% discount. And went on like that, and I didn't pick up the list. I said, Mr. Rose, I said, I can't do that. I said, the reason you could come to my store and look at a Leica is because other people, for the short time, couple of years that I've been in business, other people have permitted me to order stuff for them and make a just profit on it, and then I could turn it back into my store, the profit, I mean, and invest in more merchandise so that I have it. Consequently, when you come in to look at a Leica, I have a Leica, had a Leica to show you. Now, I said, I'd feel like I was selling those people up the river if I sold it to you at a discount that they had contributed to me having in stock. And I don't think it's fair to them. It isn't fair to me. And I said, I'm not going to do it. Well, he shoved the list forward to me, over to right to my hand. He said, you better take this home tonight and think it over. I put my finger on the list and shoved it back over to him. I said, Mr. Rose, you take it home and think it over. And I got up, started over at the gate, and had about half open when I thought of something. I turned around and I said, Mr. Rose, you know, I've been in business now a little over 2 years, and I haven't sold you anything yet, but I've been expanding my business all these 2 years, and I feel like if I never sell you anything, I'll still advance my business and make a living at it and get a good business going. I turned to go again, and then I stopped again. I turned around, and I said, by the way, Mr. Rose, I said, that offer you have made me for the short time I've been in business is the biggest deal that I've been offered. But I said, I'm walking away from it, and I said, that's something you never did. I turned around and went out. I was disgusted, really burning inside. Walked back over to the store, and I'll be darned if Charlie Bender, who was my well, he's the real estate agent that had was really my landlord for the building owner. Roger, he says, you must be crazy. I said, what are you talking about? Why, you ought to sell Fred Rose and his 3 sons anything they wanted at wholesale. Said, look what it mean to have them come in your store. I said, Charlie, damn it. I said, I'm not running a social agency here. I'm running a business trying to make a living. And I said, I don't care what kind of people come in here, but I said, for crying out loud, I can't afford to have somebody come in here just for the looks of the thing. And I said, it's not going to work. I said, what's this guy got? He said, you're over here beating the bushes trying to win a battle for him. I said, he could buy you out and me out and not no even spend any money. But I says, for crying out loud, you act like it's a death-defying thing if I don't do this. Well, Roger, he says, you'll have to learn something. You'll have to learn that's the way you do business. I said, it's not the way I do business. I don't want it. Well, I went on in the store, and it was about closing time. Closed up. I went home. I didn't feel good all evening. I didn't sleep well that night. Next morning, I come down to the store, opened up, and I was still in a very bad mood. And the phone rang about a half hour after we opened. It was Fred Rose. Roger, can you come over to the bank? I said, well, yeah, sure. I went back over, and here he was at the same desk. He sat there, and he says, now, I'll be over this afternoon and pick up that Leica. And he says, I think I want you to order that stuff for me. But he says, I'll let you know definitely this afternoon. I'm going to have to make up my mind and make it up quick. I didn't touch the list. I said, Mr. Rose, what I said last night still goes. He said, that's all right. I'll be over there and see us after lunch. He came over. I ordered the stuff. It came in. He paid me the list price and went happily on his way. Now, we became pretty good friends. He was in the store a lot. His wife even come in and when she was downtown shopping and said, Roger, I want to thank you for something. He says, you sold Fred all that photographic stuff, and he said, what he used to do is get up in the morning and come down to the bank and stay here till almost darkness and then come home. He said, now he gets up in the morning, walks out in the woods around our house, takes pictures of birds and things, and comes to the bank about 11 o'clock. Said, I think it has extended his life. Well, this is fine. So we went on for quite a while until one day Fred walked in the store and he says, Roger, he said, been thinking about something. Andy, that was his oldest son, says, Andy's birthday is coming up. And he says, I would like to get that Leica for him for his birthday. And he said, I think by now I have earned the status of being a pretty good customer of yours. And that now you could well afford to sell me that Leica there for 25% off. I said, Mr. Rose, I want to tell you something. I said, I couldn't afford to do that now, even as much as I could have in the first place. I said, what it would do to you today, I said, I can't have you feeling that way. He said, what are you talking about? I said, well, you'd drive yourself nuts. When you thought about this thing, if I sold it to you at 25 off, you'd think, if I just hung on longer in the first place, I got the whole damn thing at 25 off. And I can't have you feeling that way. He got red in the face and stormed out of the store. A week or so went by, and I got a call from Fred Rose. Come over, he says, Roger, Ed Ball called. He's flying down to the southern part of the state today and says the color is just beautiful right now. And he says, I didn't bring my Leica in with me. And he says, Ed wants me to go along. I don't have time to get it. Says, would you be able to loan me one just for the day? He said, I'll be back around 4 o'clock. I said, well, certainly. He come over and I handed him my Leica. And he said, well, I don't want yours. I said, Mr. Rose, that's what it's for. I don't loan new stuff. And so he took it. About 4 o'clock or 4:30, he walked in the store, handed me the Leica and thanked me very much, and started to leave, got over the door and stopped. Turned back, he says, I'll be in tomorrow and pick up that other Leica for Andy's birthday. Well, that was the end of the story, and it really tickled me that the thing worked out that way. But a nice thing that made me feel good about it was a few days later I was in the Polly Parrot restaurant, which was a restaurant right downtown. A lot of businessmen ate there because it was handy and quick. There was a big bookstore and stationery store, really, and business form and all that stuff. Penzel Book, it was called, Penzel Bookshop. Charles Penzel, had opened that business years ago. Very well thought of, very fine gentleman. And so I sat down at the counter, and Mr. Penzel was in a booth kind of back of me and over to the right a little bit. He got up to pay his bill. And as he went by me, he put his arms around on my shoulder. Roger, I want to congratulate you. Why, Mr. Penzel, what have I done to deserve that? He says, Roger, I've been in business in this town a long time, many, many years, as you well know. And he said, I quite often help banks on special appraisals of land and buildings and things like that. And he says, I just heard that you accomplished something. In all my years here in business, I never heard of anyone able to do that. And he said, I just want to congratulate you. Now, out of this, I knew something. Two things that happened that made me feel that I actually earned a little respect, or some respect, from Mr. Rose, Fred Rose. Well, why did Charlie Bender, who was up in the same financial group that Fred Rose was, maybe not as much, but he's up there anyway, met me at my door? It had to be that Fred Rose called him and told him about it. That's why Charlie was waiting at my door when I got there. And then when Mr. Penzel said that, it had to be another thing that Mr. Rose had to say. Nobody else knew about this. So anyway, it made me feel pretty good. Well, that's enough of that. Let me see there by my list if there's anything here that... well, one thing, Dad's drugstore. Dad was pretty well thought of businessman, and down the street about 4 or 5 blocks was a place where Fred Wirtz, W-R-T-Z, Fred Wirtz lived, and he had a shop behind the house which they made punch boards, pull boards, and all kinds of gambling things. Now, in Indiana, you couldn't use those, but you sure could make them in Indiana. And Fred was in, of course, they were very hush-hush in places around town, and they still used them, even though it was against the law. Well, Fred Wirtz, another man, come down to see Dad one time and talked to him and said, Dad, Frank, said, you know, the election's coming up, and we've been talking about something. We want to put an honest man up for election. And he says, we decided you're the one to be it. Said, a lot of people like you and know you, and says, we want you to run for mayor, and we'll see that you get elected. Dad says, I don't want to be mayor. I don't know anything about being mayor, and I don't know any part of it. Fred says, you don't have to know anything about it. Says, we'll tell you what to do. Well, of course, Dad didn't do it. But it was my first contact with politics and the way it happens. Anyway, Dad never became mayor. Dad didn't want to be elected a dog catcher. He'd rather be dog catcher, as a matter of fact. Then another thing, you just can't ever get away from this kind of stuff. I was in high school with Kenny Rutledge, who was a very nice commercial artist, and a very nice guy, but he was on the city commission. And now this is after I had my store at Indianapolis, and so Muncie, Newcastle, and Anderson. Now, Anderson is about 19 miles west of Muncie. Newcastle is about 19 miles south of Muncie. Kenny and they got together, decided to appropriate $70,000, I think it was, to make a survey of some land with the idea of building a Tri-City airport. Well, Kenny come down to see me, and he says, Roger, he says, I'm in a position to do something, and he says, if I throw all the blueprinting for that survey your way, he says, would you give me something for doing it for you? I said, well, Kenny, I read something about that survey, and I think it's a nice idea. But I'm wondering something. Do you have any idea about how much blueprinting there would be on a survey that you're talking about? No, I don't have any idea at all. He said, I figured running into some money. I says, if it reaches $100, I'll be very surprised. I said, you can run an awful lot of blueprints for $100. So I just wondered, how much of that $100 do you want? He says, are you kidding me? I said, no, I'm not kidding you. It's just that a thing like that doesn't take that much blueprints, and blueprints don't bring that much money. Then he asked me, well, do you know a surveyor down here that might cooperate with me on the thing? I said, in other words, I wanted to say, yeah, I know a crooked surveyor. So I gave him a name, but I didn't say he was a crooked surveyor, but that's what it took. So that's all of that. But anyway, I'll have more on this sort of thing. But now there's another thing that I enjoyed so much was met a guy by the name of Steve Burris. He was the assistant county surveyor, and a guy by the name of Brown was a county surveyor. Now you could go to the county courthouse and go in offices. They all look like courthouse offices until you walked in the surveyor's office. They had curtains of the windows. There was a nice young lady behind the counter. You thought you suddenly stopped into a place of business, not a political office of any kind. And it was really quite an amazing thing that it was run that way, and that's exactly the way the thing operated. I remember Steve telling me when he went out to buy some aluminum screening for a window for the office there. And the war was on, of course, and that stuff was kind of hard to get. So he went away out in the east end of Indianapolis, which is Irvington. And he went to this little hardware store and asked this man if he had any aluminum screening or copper, whichever it was he wanted. But yeah. So he said, what size? And Steve gave him the dimension, and the guy rolled it out on the counter and picked up some shears, started to cut it. Steve threw 3 forms down on the thing. The screen was worth about $1.50 or $1.75, something like that. And he threw these 3 forms down on the screen. The old man, look, what are those for? Well, you fill those out and file them with the county clerk, and you'll get your money. The old man just rolled the screen back up and put it back on the shelf. He said, if you want to pay cash for this, I'll sell it to you. But he said, I'm not going through that. Anyway, it's called red tape. But another thing that was interesting to me was one of the rackets that went on in all of, it goes on today even. When the government sends out a bid, now this was a county office that did this, but it happened to the state and everything else. And okay, they figured out all the stuff that they use in an office in a year's time. Ledger sheets, big ledger sheets, little pads of paper, paper clips, pencils, all kinds of things that an office would use in a year's time. So they listed, and they put down there, and they asked for the price for 1 each. So what they do is take the price for 1 each and add it up for 1 each, and whoever has the lowest total gets the bid. Now, Steve saw this list come in from Sentinel Printing. Pretty sure it was Sentinel Printing. And he looked on that thing and he saw something. Ledger sheets were at a ridiculous price, maybe like, I don't know, I don't have any idea what printed form sheets would cost, but let's say normally it would cost a nickel, the thousands they would use to print them, or a dime. But here on this list, they were at, say, 35 cents a sheet or 50 cents a sheet. Because remember, we're only adding 1. Now down here is a pencil sharpener, which normally sold for $5 at that time. It was in there for a nickel. Now, the whole point is, the obvious answer is, when you add that up, a $5 pencil sharpener for a nickel is a heck of a drop in price. But they use thousands of these journal sheets, big printed special forms, and a lot of that kind of stuff. Use thousands of those. So an inflated price on those of maybe 50 cents would sure offset the price if somebody ordered 1 or 2 pencil sharpeners. Well, Steve saw this list where these pencil sharpeners are nickel. He went into every office of the courthouse, and he says, "Hey, I think we ought to get a new pencil sharpener. That's worn out there." I don't need it. He said, "Look, we get a new pencil sharpener, only nickel." He deluged that Sentinel Printing with a whole bunch of orders for pencil sharpeners. I don't think it stopped the thing, but it showed them what they felt like. But let's get more more away from that sort of thing. I want to get to some of the things that happen in the store, the little things that happen to my own instance that come up, different things. For instance, one of my friends is a friend by the name of Briggs Space, lives in Long Island. I first met him when I worked at Malone's. He came out from New York once a month to call on Wright-Patterson Air Force Base and sold them parts. They worked for the Mergenthaler Company. They built linotype machines. And of course, Wright-Patterson Air Force Base would have a bunch of that kind of stuff. And so once a month, Briggs would come in and spend some time with me, and we got to be very good friends. As a matter of fact, even now, he'll probably be out here in July and spend 2 or 3 days with me. He likes to do that. He's been coming out for the last several years around July to do it. But anyway, one day there in the store, 2 young engineers from some high-tech company there in Dayton walked in the store, and the one fellow I knew, he was an engineer for one of the local high-tech companies, and he introduced the other fellow, who was the same type of fellow he was, but he was from a New York outfit. And the local guy stood there at the Leica case, and he saw a lens with a 5.6 Sumeron 28 millimeters. It didn't make too many of them, but it was a used lens that lay there in the showcase. He says, "How much is that?" I pulled it out and showed it to him. He kept looking at it, and he says, "How much is that?" And I says, $85. And the guy from New York says, "Oh, for crying out loud," says, "I can buy those all over New York for $40. Make it to me for $40. Well, I didn't like that. I knew the guy was lying, and I don't like for somebody to butt in, and he wasn't even buying the darn lens anyway. I said, "Look, fellow, the price is $85. I don't care what they sell them for in New York." And then he kept arguing with me, and this gripes me. I don't mind if anybody asks me for a better price, but after I say no, I can't see any reason to go ahead and argue about it. Well, at any rate, I didn't change it. And he got real insulting. It's a known fact that there's an awful lot of people in New York that know very well that anybody who lives out in this area doesn't know anything. I'm not talking about all people in New York. I'm just there seems to be a chosen few or a bunch, and that we're dumber than the Dickens for even being here. Anyway, something's got to keep these Indians from storming into New York again. They did it years ago, you know. Anyway, they kept arguing, or he kept arguing. I knew the guy from Dayton wanted to buy it. I could tell the way he talked, but now he was in a position spot. If he bought the lens, in spite of what his friend said, he was in a mess with him, and an embarrassment. I could tell that probably the guy would go back to New York the next day and he'd come in and want to buy the lens. Well, anyway, as they were standing there looking at something else, they'd quit arguing about it, and looking at something else, I saw the show window. Looking through it, I saw Briggs come across there and come in the door. Walked up the showcase. I remember these 2 guys still standing there. Shook hands, talked a little bit, and he looked down. He said, "Hey, let me see that lens." Well, I got the lens out and showed it to Briggs. He says, "How much is that?" And I says, $85. "Good God, give it to me. They're $175 in New York." I tell you, you couldn't plan anything nicer than that. Really, it really gave me a thrill. And you should have seen the look on those 2 guys' faces, particularly the guy from local that wanted to buy the lens. He saw it went right out from under him. Well, anyway, another thing that happened to me in Chicago a year or two ago. I had a lens laying on my counter at the show there. Price of $200 on it. It was something like a wide-angle lens of some kind. And a real cocky guy. I did have a nap all night last night. I'm sorry I yawned. But he looked at that lens laying there, and he says, real cocky, you know, he says, "Hey, what's your best price on that lens?" I says, "What lens?" I knew what he was talking about. He said, "Well, that lens right there." I said, "Oh, $300. Well, he said, "It's only marked $200. My best price would be $300. I don't remember whether I sold him or not, but I got my point across. But I like to have fun at these shows I go to. That's something that is a contributing factor in going to the thing. For maybe one day or maybe 2 days, whatever the show is, I'm back in my store, and without all the headaches of the rest of the week. So I like to have fun. I've had a lot of fun with customers, and oh yeah, there was one guy up in Cleveland came walking by. It was on Sunday, the second day of the show, and things were kind of dead. And my counter, I had some Leica lenses laying there, and he pointed at a Sumerit 50mm 1.5 lens. He just, he was dressed. He had a top coat over his arm and a hat on and smoking a cigar. And he pointed at that lens. He said, "That lens is no damn good." I said, "That's amazing." He says, what do you mean?" I said, "It's amazing that you have the ability to just point at the lens, just look at the lens and say it's no good." He says, "Everybody knows that lens is no damn good." I says, "No, that's not true, because I happen to have one in my own kit, and I like it very much." Like I said, anybody that says that don't know what they're talking about, and they turned and walked away. Maybe an hour went by or something, and things kind of died. I was really thinking about getting packed up and coming home. Well, here he came back by. Now, since things had died down, I had my tape recorder there, and I had some nice music going. So he come up the counter there and stood there listening to music for a little bit. So he says, "I sure like Beethoven." I says, "Well, you're wrong again. That's Tchaikovsky." Well, he turned. We didn't have no further conversation. He left. But I don't like to be facetious to everybody, but once in a while, it pays to be that way, or whatever else you want. Oh yeah, as I said at the beginning, I think I said at the beginning of the thing, I'm going to sound like the hero of this whole stinking thing. But anyway, this is what happened. My store at Muncie, first showcase, was full of Leica stuff. And one evening, we were open, I think, Friday evenings till 8 or 9 o'clock. One evening, this guy come in, a stranger, a youngish guy. I'd put him in his 20s, maybe 30, I don't know. He was stooped over looking at an M2 Leica that was in there. And I got through with the customer. I just opened the door and pulled the Leica out and set on top of the case. I said, "Here, you can look at it better." He picked up and looked at it, and he says, "Well," he says, "I'm going to buy one of these days." He says, "I'm from Alaska." He says, "I'm just traveling all over the country, sightseeing." And he says, "I'm going to find somebody that's going to sell me one of these at 25% discount." I said, "Well, you probably will. You'll find somebody that'll do that for you. You're going to keep looking, burn a lot of gas, spend a lot of time looking, but," I said, "you'll find somebody. I wouldn't give up if I were you. I'd just keep doing it." He said, "Well, why don't you sell me this at 25 off?" He says, "I'll buy it. I'm from Alaska. I'm going through the country. I'll buy it. You'll make a little money, and I'll be gone. You won't ever have to monkey with me again." I says, you just mentioned one of the big reasons why I wouldn't sell it to you for that." He said, "What do you mean?" I said, "See that fellow standing there and that other fellow standing there?" And he said, "Yes." I said, "That one's Bob Hoyt, and this other fellow is Paul Brown." I said, "They're both good Leica customers of mine. They live here. If I'm going to sell it 25 off, I'm going to sell it to one of those guys because they're here where they can continue buying stuff. You're leaving the country, and I don't give a damn about you." Well, he left. And I want to add, he didn't buy the Leica. Then, as I say these things, other things keep coming up. Had a fellow, I had a used 3C Leica with a Sumatar lens on it. At that time, I wanted I think it was $175 for it. Well, a guy had been in looking at it and left, and later he come back in one day with a Canon, rangefinder Canon, with a Serenar 1.8 lens, 50 millimeter, and a 135 millimeter f3.5, which Canon made. They were brass, they were heavier than a Dickens. Wonder what kind of a trade I'd give him. So I thought about it, and I knew it wasn't going to work. But I didn't have any Japanese cameras in my store, and I didn't want any at that time. And so he had that camera with him, and I looked at him, and I said, well, I'll give you $50 trade-in. Oh, he hit the ceiling. Boy, he hit the ceiling. He $50? I said, well, look, yeah, I said, I'm not very fond of Japanese cameras, and I said, I like to, if I trade them in, I want to trade them in at a price that I know that I can put a very good price on them and get rid of them fast, so I get my money out of them. And he said, well, I am not going to buy it. He said, I won't do that. I said, well, you came in here with this stuff to trade in. Now, what kind of a deal did you have in mind? You must have had something in mind that if I mentioned it, you'd take me up on it. Now, I said, what deal did you have in mind? What kind of a deal? Well, he says, I thought at least you'd trade even. I said, well, let me think of this a minute. You say at least I would trade even. You must have harbored some idea then that I would even pay you some boots? Yes, he says, that idea crossed my mind. I said, you know something? You tell me one good reason why I would do this, and I'll do it. But boy, it'd have to be a good reason. Well, he said, for one thing, you'd have 3 things to sell, and now you only got 2. Just a camera body and lens. And I got 2 lenses. I said, man, that ain't a good reason. You're asking me to work 3 times to replace something that I only have to sell 2 things. That ain't a reason for doing it. That's a reason for not doing it. I said, give me a good reason. Well, he, of course, didn't. And then along the same lines, a fellow from Indianapolis kept coming in there. And you see, the thing is, Muncie was a town then of about 65,000 people. And anybody in a bigger town always feels that the guy in the small town doesn't know as much as the guy in the big town. I can't quite agree with that. But anyway, this fella came in several times and looked at Leica and talked about price. We never got together. One day he came in the store and he says, you know, the thing that I think about is that I want that Leica. But he says, I found out what you paid for those, and you can darn well sell me one at a discount, 25 off. I said, well, I didn't know you was interested in what I paid for them, or I'd have told you. I don't care. And I said, now the one you're looking at was $400, wasn't it, with camera body and lens, $400, yeah. Now if I sell it to you at 25 off, you'd get that for $300, wouldn't you? Yeah. I said, that'd be $100 that I didn't get. Yeah, that's correct. I said, well, all right, I'll tell you what. I will do this. I will do this for you, and which will literally make you $100. Because you wouldn't be paying me that 100, so you'd still have it. Yeah, all right. I says, I'll do it on one condition. Well, he says, what's the condition? You do something for me worth $100. He said, well, I'm buying the camera. I said, wait a minute. You said you knew how much I paid for it. And so you don't have to You know very well that I didn't make $100 if I sell it to you at 25 off. So I don't care what it is, paint my house or do anything is worth $100 to you, and I'll sell you that at 25 off. Well, of course, that's another sale I didn't make. I didn't want to make. But another similar thing, I don't know whether it was the same camera or not, but anyway, across the street from my store in Muncie on the second floor was a fellow had an office. He was a commercial artist. And I could go at the front of the store and look up there, and he'd be sitting there at his drawing board. Well, about every morning, he'd meet me at the door and sometime waiting for me to open the store. He'd come in and look at some things, but you got to look at that used Leica, and he kept talking about it. Boy, I'd sure like to have that. And I said, well, Joe, it's right there ready for you. And he said, well, I want to spend the money. He says, I don't know. He says, I have to think about it. Now, another funny thing was, on that same camera, that another guy from Indianapolis had been in and looked at it 2 or 3 times. And a guy from Connersville, Indiana, came in, and he kept offering me $150. Well, one morning I opened up, and Joe was down there at the door waiting for me. Come in, he says, give me that damn camera. He says, here's the money, $175. He says, now I can go over there and get some work done. He says, I sit up there working on a job, and he says, I get thinking about that camera, and it drives me crazy. He says, give it to me, and I'll go up there and get my work done. So he bought it. And honest to gosh, it wasn't more than about a half an hour than the guy from Indianapolis came in. And he said, Roger, I've been thinking about that used Leica. Why don't you let me take that camera with me? I'm going to Detroit today, and if it works all right, I'll buy it. I said, well, now, there's a couple things wrong. He says, what's that? I said, first place, I already told you it worked well. I told you it was in good shape, and I guaranteed it. So the point is, I don't loan stuff for trial. Because I said, you're really not trying out the equipment, you're trying out the person. And I said, I can't have any way of guaranteeing the results on that basis. But I said, another sad story about this thing, the guy across, if you see him right up there in that office, he went in there and bought it the first thing this morning. Oh, nuts. He said, I sure wanted that camera. I said, well, that's too bad, it's gone. He left, and another, I don't know how much time it would come in, this guy from Connersville come in, walked up the Leica case, pulled a roll of money out, and laid out piles of money right in front of me. Right there's 150 greenbacks. He said, I want that Leica. I said, I told you the price is 175. I know it, but here's cash on the barrel of cash right now, ready for you. And I said, well, there's another thing. If you look in the case, it ain't there. That guy up right there in the office owns it now. He bought it this morning. You know, these kind of things make you feel real good. And you can't plan them. They just happen, and I say it's one of the nicest happenings that I have ever seen. And I've had a lot of them, and it's really funny. Like another guy came in from New York one time, and Merle had opened the store up, and I came in about an hour late, and I walked in, and Merle was talking to this customer. And when I walked in the back door, Merle said to me, he says, Roger, will you take care of this gentleman? And he says, I'm not getting along too well. He doesn't like the price that I offered him for his trade-in. Merle turned around and walked away. I wasn't within 15 feet of Merle at any point. And I said, well, let me see what we're talking about here. And I saw the used Leica laying there, and he had a little retina camera. And he says, what I want to know is what kind of a trade you'll give me on that Leica. I said, okay. I said, all right, I'll allow you $50 on it. He said, you guys got some kind of a code. I said, what are you talking about? He said, that's exactly what he said. And he says, you got some kind of a code. I said, well, I don't know what you're talking about, but I said, that's $50 what I'll allow you. I don't remember where he bought it or not, but it's unimportant. I want to get back to something else here in the thing. So many things happen. Like all, well, well, let's see here. Oh, yeah, there was a thing that happened in Indianapolis. Uncle Ernest Reicheldafer, if you remember, you who know him, had worked like a devil to get a Democrat governor replaced by a Republican in Indiana. Uncle Ernest was a devout Republican, and he worked like the devil to get Ralph Gates elected to governor. And finally, Ralph got in. Well, anyway, one day Uncle Ernest walked in my store in Indianapolis, and he said, "Get your hat and coat. We're going on someplace." I did, and I said, "Where are we going?" He said, "We're going over to the State House, and I want to introduce you to the governor." So we went over and walked in the office, and the receptionist, Uncle Ernest, said, "Would you tell Governor Gates that Ernest Reicheldafer would like to see him?" She says, "Do you have an appointment?" Uncle Ernest says, "No," and she says, "Well, he's very busy." He said, "Just go in the office and tell him that Ernest Reicheldafer is here." Walked in, she came right out and said to come in. Well, I was introduced to the governor, sitting at his big desk, and I sit down at the end of it, and Uncle Ernest sat down at the end, and we chatted a little bit and everything, and then I could sense something. The warm friendliness that Uncle Ernest had known Ralph for many years, but the warm friendliness that I had expected didn't seem to be radiating too much. And there was a little more cold atmosphere there than what I had expected to see. And when Ralph got to be governor, when he making the appointments, he told Uncle Ernest he could be head of the state highway department. Uncle Ernest says, "I know nothing about building highways." He says, "I'm just a farmer boy from Geneva, Indiana, and I got a general store there." And he says, "I have no business being head of anything like that." And Gates said, "Well, you don't have to know anything, so you just hire people to know that." But Uncle Ernest wouldn't do it. But anyway, we walked out of there, and Uncle Ernest said, "You know, something you keep in mind, so you can have your best friend can be a best friend to you for years. But once he gets elected to a high office, as he now becomes a politician, and the friendship leaves." Well, kind of an education, which brings me up to something else about the Indiana State Highway Department. It was interesting to me. You see, in my store in Indianapolis was a big store for all kinds of engineering things. Didn't sell any cameras there. It was drafting supplies, engineering supplies, transits, dumpy levels, and that sort of thing, and blueprinting, photostats, tracing, reproduction, everything that would apply to an engineering department or a drafting room, an architect. That was the business I was in. And so they sent out a bid for 24 new drafting tables. And they had to be Hamilton tables. Hamilton made up in someplace in Wisconsin. And my two competitors, Indianapolis Blue and the H. Lieber Company, both represented that company. I didn't. So I sent the bid, the invitation to bid, I sent it to Art Jacobs, who was sales manager of the CFP's company in Chicago. CFP's company built blueprint machines, and I had met Art Jacobs the first year I got in business. Art was a very fine man, very, very honest man, very nice guy. And a couple of things had come up, and he said that they never got along with the Indiana Highway Department because too much politics involved, and they never got any place. But anyway, because CFP's company also represented Hamilton drafting furniture, I sent the bid up there. Art called me. He says, "Roger," he says, "you've opened up a keg of worms here." And I said, "What are you talking about?" He says, "Hamilton has an agreement with their dealers in which any sale made to any department of the government, town, city, state, county or anything, or federal. That must be quoted by Hamilton through that dealer. And he says they've got 2 dealers in Indianapolis, and neither one of them have notified Hamilton, and Hamilton is madder than the devil. I said, well, what's that going to do? And he says, what it's going to do is this. We will bid it through you. You're to put our bid in, and then if either Indianapolis Blue or Liebers get the bid over you, says Hamilton will ship to the state highway at their price, and the profit will be given to you, bypassing their 2 dealers for not paying attention to their franchise agreement. Well, another thing involved in this thing was some little, they call them reference tables. They weren't in anybody's catalog. You had to have them made. So I went over to State Highway and measured one of them. It was a simple table, just about 24 inches wide and 36 inches long, or maybe 30 wide and 48 inches long, I don't remember, with 1 drawer and 4 legs. That's all there was to it. It was just a table to lay tracings and things. So anyway, I went up to measure that thing, and then there was a place in Indianapolis called King's Billiards. This was a place that built all kinds of furniture for bars and restaurants. And they worked with wood all the time. Well, I made a drawing of this table and went over to the King's Billiard place to show them what I was going to need and get a price. And I told him what it was for, and the guy says, well, we can build those for you for $15 a piece. This was back during the war when before prices had gone up on this stuff, and he says, how long would it take? Well, he's not very long. Give me a quotation on it. I says, all right. I said, now I got to bid this. You'll stick your $15. Yeah? Oh, sure. He made it in writing. Well, I went over and attached it to the bid from Hamilton, from Pease, the bid that I got, and I bid them in at $24 a piece. I figured that $9 on it wasn't too bad to make, in addition to the Hamilton tables. Now, here's another thing that happened. Because Hamilton tables price control was an established figure, what my friendly competition would do, they would have those tables made and charge maybe 5, 6, 8, maybe 10 times the price of what a table costs, because they were not a catalog item. Well, in my ignorance, quite often you'll see that my ignorance is played in my favor sometimes. Anyway, in my ignorance, I didn't think or even wanted to boost the price to hell and gone for those tables. So when the bid was totaled up, I got the bid. And boy, all hell broke loose. I wasn't supposed to get the bid, but it was public opening. I had my man over there at the opening, and they had theirs, and there wasn't a darn thing they could do about it, because ours was the lowest bid, and that was it. So the order went through, the tables were shipped. Then I got a call from the highway department, purchasing department. He was furious. He says, you got the bid for these tables, all right. But he says, those tables came in with the drawers, but the locks are not in them. So they're delayed because of the war, and it'll be some time before the locks are delivered. And he said, we're not going to pay you 1 penny until the locks are here and installed. Well, that scared the living devil out of me, because I didn't have enough money to pay for all those tables by a long shot. So I called the CFP's company and talked to Art Jacobs. He says, Roger, he says, as far as I'm concerned, I don't care if it takes 10 years to get the money. He says, we stuck one into them and we got it. And he says, don't worry about it. He says, when you get the money, let us know, and we'll close the deal out. Well, anyway, that was another time when that sort of thing helped. In selling, there's something I've noticed. I try to avoid the use of the word no, because no, it always comes at the end of something, and there's a period after it. It's so final. It closes everything off. So if a guy comes in and says, will you sell this to me at half price? And I can say no and feel all right about it. But to give you a little example, one night at Malone's, one evening at Malone's when we would open, an elderly man and woman came in with a binocular and went up to the guy working with me that night and wanted to know if he repaired binoculars. He says, no. The couple turned and started to leave and walked by me. I just finished a customer. And I said, let me see those binoculars. All it was the eye cup was loose, a couple set screws. And I fixed them. And it made me think of the word no, how final it was. What is wrong, even if you don't think you can do something, is maybe look at it and try and get a little satisfaction of having tried to help the people. Well, anyway, the people were happy. And I didn't even charge them. It wasn't that much of a job. Well, I think what I'm going to have to do is stop this for the present. It's now 1:30 Sunday, as June the 2nd, as you can see right there. Let me see if I've missed anything here. Don't see a thing that I've missed. But, I mean, I don't, yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, gosh, yeah. Don't forget this one. Again, we're back on the State Highway Department of Indianapolis. One day, I got a call from a guy by the name of George Mess. Mess' brother was something involved in some kind of politics. I don't know, but George Mess had an engraving plant. They made engravings for the printing industry and all that sort of thing. And he called and wanted to know if I could come over to his office, which was a short ways away, and attend a meeting tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock, or 10 o'clock, whatever. I was sure. Well, I couldn't figure out what on earth could be of anything that I could have that would be of any interest to the engraving industry. I saw no possible connection whatsoever of that. So, but I thought, well, I'll find out. I went over and I was ushered into this room, office probably 15, 18 feet square. On two sides were men sitting in chairs. I felt like I'd walked into an inquisition chamber or something. Well, I didn't know what was going on. And George Mess introduced me to everybody, and he started talking to me. He says, Roger, he says, we've checked into your politics, and we know that you're on the right side, which meant I was a Republican. And he says, we're very dissatisfied with the source of supply that we're getting, our source of supply for things. He says, would you consider running blueprints for the state highway? I said, yes, very definitely. I would like to run blueprints for the state highway. But I got a question. He says, what's that? I said, the state highway has more than twice as much blueprinting equipment as I've got, and they only run half of it. I can't understand you going out and wanting a supplier to run blueprints when you got all that equipment over there and they're running it. They're running blueprints, but they got a capacity far greater than mine. Well, that caused a little problem there. Just a minute now. Wait a minute. Everybody jumped in on the deal and started talking about it. And he said, oh, wait a minute. One guy corrected it. Says, wait a minute, George. It's not running a blueprints. He says, I think it's blueprint paper. Is what we're talking about. And George, oh, yeah. And then they joined in. They finally agreed that it was supplying blueprint paper was what they were talking about. I said, yes, I'd be very glad to supply blueprint paper. Kleifel Nesser, K&E, who I represented there in Indianapolis, made blueprint paper from Chicago, and that blueprint paper was always shipped prepaid. And so I figured what it would be prepaid into them. And he says, well, here's the point. He says, we have a friend. He's not in politics. He's not in present time. He doesn't hold any office or anything like that. But he says he's been a good friend of our party. And he says, we want to do something to help him. And so what we want to do is if you arrange with you to sell blueprint paper to the state, but give him a cut on it. I said, well, now look, let me put it this way. I will be glad to pay him a commission on his sales, on the sales that we make that he is capable of making to the state highway. And for that matter, commission on anybody that he wants to sell it to. Be perfectly happy to pay him a commission. In fact, I'd like to have 3 or 4 guys out doing that for me. And he said, well, that'd be fine. And I said, what's the guy's name? I don't remember the name clearly, but it was Doc something. And Doc, we went by. And I'd heard the name before, but I didn't quite connect him up with anything. So he says, Doc will be over to see you. Says, we'll carry the message to him, and said, you talk it over with him. I says, all right. Well, that was the end of the meeting. So I went back over to the store, got thinking about this. They would use, the highway would use 20 to 40 rolls, 350-foot rolls, 36 inches wide, a week. So that was figuring like pretty good money. And since it was shipped in, I didn't have to touch it. But I noticed in my K&E cost book that a roll of blueprint paper cost me $8. The selling price of that blueprint paper was $8.91. Now that meant Bill Jones could walk in off of the street and buy a roll of that blueprint paper for $8.91. I thought, well, my God, 91 cents on 20 rolls, that ain't even 20 bucks. So how much money is old Doc going to expect out of that? But well, whatever it is, 20% or something, whatever we decide on will be all right, because I don't have to touch the stuff anyway. Well, anyway, a few days went by, and we got a big order from the highway department on printed tracing cloth for the drafting department. And but we got that because I had previously sent a bid in at a heck of a low price, and I got the order. And the order was just come in. So in came this guy, a little kind of a short guy, and introduced himself as Doc so-and-so. So I took him in my office to sit there, and he told me, he said, well, I want to show you this connection is working. He said, you just got an order for a printed tracing cloth. I said, yes, Doc, but I said, I want to call your attention to a little fact here, and that is that order I got was due to a bid, a low-cost bid that I sent in 2 months ago, long before this subject came up. So I said, the connection had nothing to do with me getting that. But I said, nevertheless, it's all right. But I said, I got some questions. He says, all right, what? I'm curious about what kind of a percentage you're thinking about on this thing. I said, the cost of this blueprint paper to me, as you'll see here in the book, here's the book right here in front of you, is $8 a roll. And it sells for $8.91. So I'm trying to figure out how much of that 91 cents per roll were you expecting to get? He said, oh, you're doing this all wrong. I said, well, tell me about it. He said, look, you are to bill the highway department $15 a roll. And then we split the difference between 8 and 15, which is $7, which would be $3.50 a roll for each of us. I said, well, now wait a minute. In other words, this paper would go in there and it'd be billed from Pelham Blueprint Company to the State Highway at $15 a roll. Is that what you're saying? He says, yeah, exactly. I says, you know, Doc, sometimes somebody's going to get damn tired of this kind of shenanigans, and they're going to have an investigation. And you know what? There ain't going to be any invoices in there with Roger Pelham's name on them, because I don't get along too well arguing with lawyers. And I said, the more I can put them off, I do. And so I'm stopping this right now. I says, at this moment, our connection with you, the State Highway Department, as far as I'm concerned, is at an end. So let's cancel. So good day. He got up and left. That was the end of that. Now that happened along in, I'd say about around 49 or something, because I went out of that store business in, I think it was 49, and I came back up to Muncie. Now in 60, as you probably know, is when I lost my store in Muncie through a receivership, which we won't go into details of that. But anyway, then I came to Dayton and went to work. Well, for quite a while, I put this ballet on thinking it would be quieter. I forgot about this part, but anyway, it doesn't matter. Anyway, when I went back up to Muncie, as I may have mentioned, I may be duplicating it, but quite a bit of time has taken place since I last was in the recording. You'll notice there's something in my pocket now, and the cat's laying there. That shows the lapse of time that took place, and I took the date off there because it told you in the second. You don't have to have it on there all the time. Now, the good doctor, of course, was caught in his act of buying all this land in his nephew's name, buying it at cheap prices before anybody knew about it, and selling it at exorbitant prices back to the state. And as I predicted to the good doc many years before that, people got tired of this shenanigans and did something about it. Like I may have mentioned this, he's now eating free, off of the public, of course, and a place to sleep, a dry place to sleep at Michigan City. I don't know whether he's still there or not, because this is 1956 and that was in 1960, which if you take a lot of careful mathematics there, you'll find out it's about 36 years ago. And so that's that. Now, you know, I like to have fun at these sales I go to, like Chicago. I used to go to Chicago, Detroit, Cleveland, Indianapolis, Louisville, Cincinnati, and all those places. Well, a couple of things have happened. In the first place, it's getting much more difficult to find desirable Leica stuff. In fact, almost any Leica stuff, particularly cameras and lenses, and particularly M model. But, so I don't go to as many of these shows, and so I always try to make the one in Chicago, because I've been going there for some time. I belong to the Chicago Photographic Collectors Society, and also the Ohio Camera Collectors Society. And I try to make those two shows. Just got back from the one at Columbus over Memorial Weekend, and I had a little Leica stuff and sold it, did very well. And so I'm not complaining. But at these shows, I like to enjoy myself, and there's a lot of pleasant people. Now, I've mentioned a lot of more or less disagreeable things, or things that happened that maybe wasn't so good, or anything. But anyway, there's an awful lot of very nice people, and I've met so many wonderful people at these shows. And actually, in Chicago, I've got a following there. People that always come to see me, whether they buy something or not. Jim Mayer, one of the fellows that was instrumental in putting that show on for many years for the Chicago Camera Collectors, each year he wanted to buy something from me, and quite often did. And nearly every time if I had something of real interest to him. And there's others like that. Well, I had a funny thing happen here, and like I say, I like to have fun with customers and enjoy it. Well, a nice gentleman, elderly gentleman, carrying a brown bag, came up to the counter and wanted to know if I had a cable release for his camera. I said, well, what kind of a camera is it? He told me, and when it turned out that the cable release he wanted required a taper in, like all Compur shutters, and most of the German shutters, most of the cameras require a cable release with a tapered thread, so that it's easily fitted to all of them. And so he said what he needed was that. I had one about 8 inches long, and it was one I'd come in with a bunch of stuff. I didn't have any money in there or something. I handed it to him. He says, how much is it? I said, nothing, you can have it. Well, he said, people don't do that kind of stuff. I said, well, look, I just did. So let's leave it alone. I'm very glad to give it to you because I said it's not worth much. And besides that, it's a small size and the wrong end for old Leicas. So anyway, be that as it may, I want you to have it. He talked a while and he says, I want to give you something. Well, he reached his brown bag and pulled out a little picture, a painting that he had made. And here it is. See what it is, the 4 horses and a barn there. Well, it's on a little wooden block here. And I said, well, I'll pay you for the picture. He says, I don't want to. He says, you gave me something, I want to give you something. So he gave me this little plaque with this painting that he had done on there, and I liked it. I think it's nicely composed, and it's a nice little picture. And what a stupid thing I did. He left, thanked me very much, and I thanked him. And you know, I've regretted very much that I didn't ask his name and get his address. I would like to have written to him. And I see down at the bottom it's signed A something, 92. 92 or 93. 92, I think. Anyway, but I have no idea who he is, and it makes me feel badly that I can't thank the man. Well, a lot of things happen. Like I had 2 Oriental people come up to my counter and talk to me. Middle-aged people, very nice. They were obviously Chicago people, Orientals. They weren't buyers from Japan there. And then they talked, and I talked to them. And in fact, they want to discuss something about photography. And I like to talk about photography. That's my business. And how to do something, things. This is part of, I feel, part of my job and certainly part of my enjoyment when somebody comes up and wants to talk about doing something with cameras. I like to sell them. But boy, I sure like to sell to people that are going to use them too, to just look at them. Anyway, I talked quite a while. I don't know, maybe it was only 5 minutes or maybe 10 minutes or something, but I was interested in what they were saying. When they left my counter, didn't buy anything, and an hour or so went by, and they come back again. They said, we want to thank you for something. I said, what? He said, we want to thank you for taking the time to talk to us. He says, you did that. Nobody else up here has done that. And he says, we appreciate it very much. Well, I enjoyed them. And I enjoy a lot of those people. I enjoy the other dealers. A lot of the dealers like to tell me how wrong I am about specializing in Leica, for one thing. Or some dealers say, well, you don't get enough money for your stuff. But in case they want to buy something from me, they say it's too high. So I canceled both off against the other. But anyway, all these kind of things happen. And so it's really funny. Another thing that happened, I bought a bunch of stuff. There was one Leica lens in here, but a man by the name of George Aganos, who was a Greek fellow in business with Hartzell here in town. And George laid in bed, I guess, for several years and finally died. And when I went out to see this camera stuff, I didn't even know it was his. When I got out there and was talking to his wife, and the name come up, Aganos. And I said, my gosh, you mean you're related to George Aganos with Hartzell? Yeah, sure. Well, we got acquainted there, and he had a whole bunch of cameras, honest to gosh, folding cameras that I wouldn't even partly interested in them. But there was one thing in there which I saw that I did want. It was a 73 millimeter 1.9 lens, Leica lens, Hector. They're rather rare. It wasn't complete with. They usually came with a hood and caps. This one had a couple of caps but no hood. But anyway, it was still a nice find. And then there was another thing there that I picked up. It was a Zeiss Deltrinum binocular. And but you couldn't see through them. When you looked through, you just looked like you're looking through pebble grain something, but you never saw through them. It looked more like you're looking at a disc with all this stuff on them. But anyway, I didn't even put those down as any value. But cosmetically, they were beautiful. What happened to them and got them in that condition, I don't know. But I blocked all this stuff together, and I told them they wanted to get rid of the junk, no matter what I give them for it or if I give them anything. They wanted to get it out of their way. And there were cameras there, some that I'd never even seen before. There's nameless things, or a couple of Chinese cameras, and 3 French folding cameras. Who ever heard of a French folding camera? Called a Kinax, I think it was, Kinax. Anyway, I took all the stuff there. I said, look, I tell you what, I'll give you $300 for the whole pile. They said, good, you mean you'll pay us $300 for that stuff? I said, yeah. He said, well, all right. So I gave him the $300. Well, I sent the binoculars to a place in Chicago that works on binoculars. And they particularly work on Zeiss, lights, other German binoculars, but all binoculars of any value. And so I sent them up there, and they gave me an estimate of $79. Well, that was cheap enough. They were Zeiss Deltrinum, 8x30s, I think, if I remember correctly. And it cost me, well, with shipping and everything, it ran me about $85. Well, I got them back, and Bob Younger saw them, and he wanted to know what I wanted for them. I said, $275. He says, I'll take them. So I sold them. And later, wish I'd kept them, but I don't need them too much. But anyway, things like that. Now, the 73 millimeter 1.9, I sold for $500, which was nice, even though it wasn't mint. But all this stuff you find, you can figure that somebody wants it. Well, I put, those 3 Kinax cameras and some other stuff, I put in the auction over at Columbus. Here we have an auction on Saturday night, Memorial Weekend. And I put that and a couple other things I bought. I had about $150 in it. And the auction brought me $605, which I was amazed. I would have been tickled to get $300. I didn't think it would even go that much. But anyway, it come out real nice. But at an auction, you never know. But anyway, when I bought all that stuff from George Aganos, there were 3 what they call extender lenses, I think it's called, or something. Anyway, they screw into, where are you going, George, or Barney? Anyway, they screw into the front of another lens, the lens on your camera, and they make a moderate telephoto and a moderate wide angle, and they're only moderately good, I'll add that. But they did have a couple of little optical viewfinders, which weren't top-notch. They were not Leica finders by any means, but they weren't bad, so I threw the lenses away. I didn't even want to be guilty of trying to sell or give those to anybody. But I kept the finders. Maybe they would do for somebody that needs a finder. The 2 finders covered an area about the same as a viewfinder, a Leica viewfinder for a 90 millimeter lens. Now, I'm going to take these off. They're getting in my hair or my weight. Anyway, so I had them with me. And a man came up to my counter, and he had 2 women with him. I think one was his wife, and one apparently was her sister. But they were kind of a happy group and talking, and I asked him what he would like, and he said, well, I'm looking for a 90 millimeter viewfinder for my Leica. And I said, well, I don't have one. And we talked a little bit. I said, but I got something here, and I pulled one of these viewfinders out. And I started talking for it. And I gave him a hard sell on one of those viewfinders. And I said, it's not a Leica viewfinder, but it'll do for you. It's very close. And I said, it'll do all right for you and help you until you find a lights finder that you want to buy. And he wasn't very convinced and everything. And I kept talking. I really gave him a big, strong pitch on that thing. And he said, well, I hate to get much money tied up in a thing like that. And he says, well, how much are they? I said, well, hell, you can have it for nothing. I don't want the darn thing. I just brought them along to give to somebody. And I thought his wife would crack up because I tried so hard as I would try to sell anything. And then I knew I was going to give it to him, but I wanted to see his reaction. Boy, did I get a reaction. Well, anyway, that's a couple of things there. And I have a note here that I did, you know, and I said a while ago, there's an awful lot of nice people. I've mentioned things here of people that give me problems, not problems really, but I actually enjoyed the problems. But the point is, they come up with things you had to think about and knew that you weren't going to win. But there are other people, like John Coulter come in one day in my store in Muncie, and Coulter Boiler Company. I just knew who he was. He was about my age, and a nice, friendly guy. And I said, well, what can I show you, John? And he says, I want to see a cheap 35 millimeter camera. I just want a camera to carry in the glove compartment of my new car. And why I asked him this, I'll never know. I says, what new car? I guess I just want to say something. He pointed to the front door and he says, that Cadillac sitting right out there. I know, I got just exactly the camera you need. So we went up to Leica case and I brought an M3 Leica out, showed it to him. And pretty soon he says, how much is it? And I told him, he says, all right, I'll buy it. Looks like what I want. So he bought it, I wrote up the ticket, gave him a receipt, he gave me the money and everything. I said, now, John, I want to tell you something. He said, what? I said, you said you want a camera to carry in the glove compartment of your new car. I said, don't put that in the glove compartment. That's the hottest place in an automobile. Plus the fact it's the first place a thief looks. If you got to leave it in your car, put it under the seat. That's one of the coolest places. And I says, do that with it. He said, well, that's fine. Well, anyway, he went happily on his way. Another time, you know, we sold greeting cards there at Muncie, and I hated the thing. We put them in when we moved to that location in order to have something to offer the general traffic that went by the store. And so I just despised the thing. There was too much trouble, there was a pain in the neck and everything. Well, one day, a man came in the store. He had two ladies with him, and they was kind of laughing up everything, and they was buying a birthday card for somebody, and they wanted to pick up one. Oh, this would do for George real well. And then, no, this is better. And they did that, and pretty soon they picked one out, and he brought it over to me, and how much is it? And I looked on the back and told him, and I said, I've got a suggestion for you. And he says, what's that? I says, this friend must be a good friend. He said, oh, yeah, he's a very good friend. I said, why don't you, I got something you ought to buy to go along with that birthday card. He said, what's that? I said, a camera. And he said, oh, yeah, fine. And they paid me with the card, and they walked out. Wasn't gone very long. They come right back in. Hey, you know, that's not a bad idea. Let me look at the camera. He ended up buying a $100 camera. It's the only time I ever made a camera sale because we had greeting cards. Another situation that existed, just the opposite of that. I was in the store. Mary had gone to lunch or gone someplace. I was in the store alone. I was talking to a man about a Leica. We had stools there, you know. And this fellow was sitting on the stool, and we were talking about a Leica, and he was really interested. And a little old lady was in there looking for greeting cards. Finally, she come up carrying a card. She said, young man, could you help me a moment? I said, well, yes. I excused myself from the guy. And I went back with her. She said, I can't find an envelope for this card. Well, I went back there, and by golly, I found an envelope for her, and I handed that. She said, "Oh, here's another card with the same things. Have you got another envelope?" I looked and found it. Walked over to the cash register and the counter, wrapping counter, to put them in an envelope, a sack for her. And I'll be darned, she didn't stand there and read me the verse there. Then she laid the card down and said, "That's a very beautiful card. But I didn't come downtown to buy cards." She says, "I'll be back later sometime and get them." Turned around and walked out. Boy, now I walked over to the guy sitting there on the stool, and he says, "You know, I've been thinking about this, and I don't want to buy that camera. I don't want to spend that money now." I says, "I'll come in sometime later. Maybe I'll change my mind." I says, "Right now, I don't want to buy it." He left. Now, that's just the opposite of the other sale. I sold one camera because I had sold him a greeting card. Now, I was selling a camera to a guy who was, I would say, from our conversation, he was ready to buy. But that innocent thing that happened to me by that little old lady killed the sale. So that was the day that the greeting cards started going on sale at 50% off, and get the darn things out of my hair. I got rid of them. Well, I had a funny thing happen. Funny thing happened, yeah. On the way to the forum or something, huh? Well, anyway, I was working at the store one night, and we didn't have air conditioning back then. So I had the lights on, and I had cracked the door open about 6 inches and put a block there, so let some air in there at night. It says it cooled off a little. Excuse me. Anyway, I saw two men, very well-dressed men, looking in the show window. Well, I stepped to the door, and I didn't recognize the men, but I could tell what they were. I was pretty sure they were traveling salesmen that happened to hit Muncie, and they were at the hotel, and they didn't want to sit there and watch TV or didn't want to go to a show. They were just walking around the town at night, seeing what was going on. And so I asked them if they wanted to come in and browse. I said, "You won't bother me. I'm just in there doing some work." And they said, "Yeah, sure." So they came in, and I went about my work, and one of them looked up and saw one of the better Polaroid cameras. It was a Polaroid camera with a conventional shutter and lens, a 4.5 lens, and a shutter probably went up to 500. More of a conventional camera, but with the Polaroid process built in, as we had it then. And it had some accessories with it. I think some close-up lenses and a flash and something else. I don't know what else. The camera originally sold without the accessories for, I think, around $225 or $250. But the thing is, it had these accessories with it, and I had a price. It was used, but it was just like new. I had a price of $200 on it, I believe it was. So pretty soon one of these guys that's looking around everything says, "Hey, let me see that camera." So I took it off the shelf, handed it to him, and he started playing around with it. He says, "Hey, what do you take for this cash on the barrelhead right tonight?" I said, "Well, give you the whole outfit for $175. By golly, I'll take it." And he got his checkbook out. He wrote out a check, and he says, "Now, tell you what I'll do." He said, "I'm going to give you a check tonight, dated today, for $25. Then I'm going to give you 6 additional checks, dated a month apart, for $25. I said, "Well, I got a question." He said, "Well, what?" I said, "What happened to that idea you had about cash on the barrelhead?" Well, he said, "This is the same thing." I said, "No, it isn't. Not the same thing." "Well, it is." He says, "You got all these checks, and you can pick up, cash them, and you got the money." I said, "Let me explain to you what cash on the barrelhead is." I says, "Right around the corner here and down the next corner is a commercial bar owned by a nice guy by the name of Bill Byers. Now, with that $175 cash on the barrelhead, I can walk around to that bar if I felt like it and wanted to, get me a $175 drunk right now tonight. Or I could just keep the money. Either way. But I says, with your checks, Bill wouldn't give me a small glass of beer for those checks. Although he's a friend of mine. But I said, he won't take checks. So I'm not going to do that. He kept arguing with me. He acted like I was dumber than the devil. I said, all right, I'll make you another deal. Or I'll make you a deal. I'll hold the camera. You take your check. Tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock, you come in. And we'll take all 7 of your checks and go right across the street to that bank over there. And if they'll give me $175 for your checks, we make a deal. Well, you know what happened. They knew darn well the bank wouldn't be that stupid. And they found out damn quick that I wasn't that stupid. So anyway, I didn't make that sale. But speaking of Bill Byers, brings up another thing. His girlfriend had come in the store one time and bought him a Polaroid camera, just a simple low-price Polaroid camera. Well, usually Betty would go on Monday night or whatever night this was. She went bowling. Well, I'd go to the store and work, and I knew what time she'd get out. I'd always tell her I'd go down to Bill Byers' bar and have a glass of beer and just pull up in front of the bar, and I would be there. So I went down to the bar, and Bill was there, and we talked quite a bit. And I said, by the way, how are you getting along with that Polaroid camera your girlfriend bought you? She said, oh, that thing's terrible. It's too complicated. He said, I can't mess with it. He said, it drives me nuts. Then he added something. It was real strange. He says, anyway, what I want is a camera that I can put a telephoto lens on. Bill loved to go to sporting activities. He went to horse races. He went to baseball. He went to football. He loved sports. And he says, I want a camera that I can put a telephoto lens on there and bring that horse or those players up close to me in pictures. And he said, that Polaroid camera won't do anything like that. But he said, I want that kind of a camera. He said, bring one down and show me. Well, gee, he said the Polaroid was complicated. I thought, my golly, getting him into a Leica, he never would get that figured out or remember anything about it. So I didn't do it. Finally, one Friday, he walked in the store and he said, damn you, Roger, I've told you 2 or 3 times I want to see a camera with a telephoto lens. I said, all right, so I got an M3 Leica out, showed him about the 50 millimeter lens, and I took a 135 lens out and showed him all about it. Right in the middle of my long explanation, I felt I was talking to a real amateur and that I must keep this in mind. Well, right in the middle of it, he says, Roger, stop just a minute. I stopped. He said, is this the best there is? I said, yeah. He said, how much is it? I'll buy it and get out of here. He said, I got to get going. I said, all right. I got it. I wrote up the bill and everything. Brought up a roll of film. I said, now, Bill, I want you to take this weekend and take this 20 exposure roll of film and use it up this weekend. Shoot anything just to get the 20 exposure used. And then come in there Monday, we'll get it processed, and I'll go it with you. He said, what are you talking about? He said, I'm taking off tomorrow morning. I'm going out to New Mexico, Arizona, out west, Grand Canyon. And he says, I want this camera for that. He said, I haven't got time to mess around and taking a roll of film and doing that. I said, okay. He said, and give me 6 rolls of 36 exposure film. So I got those. I brought him back up there, and he'd paid me and everything for it. I said, now, Bill, I want you to sit on that stool and listen to me. Because you're going to have to learn about some photography right here, right now. Oh, yeah, he bought a meter for it, too. I gave him a lecture as simple as I could, but hitting the necessary high spots that he would have to have. He didn't write anything down, but he had one thing working in his favor. He had a desire to get these pictures he wanted. So he did listen to me. So he finally left. And he was gone, I don't know, 2 weeks, maybe more, I don't know what it was. When he came back, He brought in those 6 rolls of film and 4 or 5 more that he had bought on the way. I hammed to Mary, and I right up. Bill left. I said, I'll call you when I get back. When he left the store, I told Mary, I said, for God's sake, when those things come back, let me see them, because if they're bad, I'm going to have to leave town, because he's going to be one mad boy. They came back, and I was amazed. Here was a guy, looks like we're running out of film or something. I don't know what that thing's blinking at me for. I got to go see. Well, anyway, when those slides come back, I checked the pictures. Out of all of those slides, he only had one that was not good, and that's because they stood at the top edge of the Grand Canyon in the late afternoon and shot a picture down in the canyon. And of course, the sun was not down in there. That was one picture. I couldn't understand. That guy got all those pictures, and the biggest part of them were beautifully composed. Looks like this is the end of the thing. I hope I haven't bored you too darn much. We'll see what happens. Good night. And the kitty says good night too.